Okay, there we go. Everybody can hear me now. All right, very good. If you want to go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 11. I'm sure everybody went home and studied for this afternoon's class last week. I appreciate that. Study for this week's class. I think you heard what you wanted to hear. Right. You're always supposed to study for the next week's class. Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11, verses 16 through 19 is what we're going to talk about this morning, or afternoon, I should say. Jesus here is speaking to the multitudes, and we'll get to what he says, specifically the parable that he's going to talk about here in just a moment. But if you start back up at verse 7 in Matthew chapter 11, it begins his discussion with the multitudes, and of course he's discussing John. It's interesting. This last couple of weeks we've talked about he is going over some things that John brought to the forefront, and he's talking with his John's disciples, those who were following after him, and here he's speaking to them again. Okay, so continue. Let's just read just a little bit, and then we'll get into the topic of discussion this afternoon. So as they departed, Jesus began to say to the multitudes concerning John the Immerser, "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? But what did you go out to see? A man clothed in soft garments? Indeed, those who wear soft clothing are in kings' houses. But what did you go out to see? A prophet. Yes, I say to you, and more than a prophet. For this is he of whom it is written, Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you." So here Jesus is doing what? He's confirming that John was or the prophet, the forerunner of the Christ. It was told that from the very beginning. Matter of fact, it would say that in parts of Scripture he actually compares John to Elijah. Okay, and he was going to come before the Messiah. He was the forerunner, the foreteller, the one who was going to come before and prepare the way for the Messiah. So. And it's interesting, you know, as we confess Christ, our name will be confessed. Look at what Jesus does here in verse 11. "Assuredly, I say to you, among those born of women." Now, think about that. Who's been born of women? Everybody. That encompasses every single human being that's ever born. Everybody. All right? It only leaves out one person, or two people, Adam and Eve. The only two people that weren't born of women. "Assuredly, I say to you, among those born of women, there has not risen one greater than" who? John the Baptist. "But he who is the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." Now, think about that. Okay, in spite of how great John was, the prophet that he was, the forerunner the foreteller and the forerunner of the Messiah himself, he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. He wasn't in the kingdom. He wasn't in the kingdom. He died before the kingdom was established. But the one who is least in the kingdom is going to be greater than John the Immerser. "And from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. For all the prophets in the law prophesied until John." And why? Because John wasn't preaching about the law of Moses, was he? He was under the law of Moses, but that's not what he was foretelling. He was foretelling the kingdom of heaven. "For all the prophets in the law prophesied until John. And if you are willing to receive it, he is Elijah who is to come. He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Now, verse 16, we get into the heart of the parable for this afternoon. All right. While Jesus is speaking, look at what he's doing. He's praising John. He's magnifying John's name, and John deserved to have his name magnified. If Jesus was going to do it, then John certainly was worthy to have his name magnified. Why? What? Because he was prophesying about the coming of the Messiah, about the greatest thing that was ever going to happen on this earth. That's what he was here to prophesy about. That's why he was worthy of such honor. The fact that he did it in the conditions that he did it, and the fact that he suffered for it up until and including his death. So that's why he was so praising, so much in the avenue of praising John. All right, so here we get into verse 16, and this talks about our parable. "But everything that I've said about John, but what happens here? To what shall I liken this generation? Well, what generation was it that John was preaching to? That generation that Jesus is speaking of. But to what shall I liken this generation? This generation that heard John, okay, heard all of the words of John, the ones that he was speaking to, the one that will be in place when the kingdom comes. What shall I liken this generation to? Okay, well, here's the parable. This is what he's throwing it down alongside. What does it say? It is like who? Children. Now, there are ways in which we are to be childlike, aren't we? Right? There are ways in which we are to be childlike in the way that we do things. Okay? The avenue of children are generally are not as quick to anger. They typically, when something wrong is done to them, they tend to forget it fairly quickly and put it away fairly quickly. Children, guess what? Children are much more inclusive than adults are. They really are. Small children, such as the kingdom of heaven, they're much more inclusive than adults are. You know, when kids go onto a playground, for the most part, it's like unless you do something really out of the beyond the pale, for the most part, kids are very inclusive. So there are ways in which we are to be childlike. There are ways in which childishness is not acceptable. Right? So now look at what he says. It is like children who sit in the marketplaces. Now, what is he talking about here? What kind of marketplaces is he talking about? Every village had a marketplace, right? Every town had a marketplace. It's where men would go to conduct their business, where people would set up shops and they would market, they would vend to one another, they would sell things that they had to sell. A great deal of work and a lot of stuff took place in the marketplaces. For the most part, though, most of the stuff that went on the marketplaces was adult in nature. People would go to buy and sell, and they would conduct business while they were there. But here he says it is like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to their companions. So here he's talking about the idea that, when kids, it's interesting, no matter what condition kids find themselves in, they always find a way to play, don't they? No matter where they are, no matter what's going on, they'll find a way to play. I don't care if it's at a funeral. I don't care if it's at a wedding. I don't care where they are. No matter what circumstances, kids will find a way to play with one another. It's in their nature, what they do. It's how they interact with one another, and it's how they grow as they play. All right. So here he's kind of setting the stage. He's getting their minds into the frame of reference that he needs them to be in. He says it's like children sitting in the marketplaces. And what are these children doing to one another? They're calling out to their companions, right? They're calling out to the companions. And what are they saying? Here's what it says. What do they say? We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We mourned to you, and you did not lament. Now, on the surface, we look at this and we think, that's kind of an unusual conduct for kids, but it's really not. As is the nature of children, are children often very fickle? I've watched children working with a school for a number of years. I've watched kids on the playground. It's interesting how kids react. You might have a group of children who have decided that they're going to play this game. They're going to play hide and go seek. Okay, so they start playing hide and go seek. But then you always have one or two that are on the other side, and they don't want to play hide and go seek. So what do? They start their own game, and they start doing their own thing. And then you have a group of people that go, "Oh, I like what they're doing more, so I'm going to go over here and I'm going to play with this group." And all of a sudden, the group that's playing hide and go seek, they got 5 people left, and everybody else is up over here playing this. Well, and they keep asking, they keep calling back and forth. Well, play with us. We'll do this. Hey, do this with us. Do this. And it's basically what the point that he's getting across to them right here. He says, we played the flute for you and you didn't dance. Look, we asked you to do something with us and you didn't do it. We made every effort to include you in this, but you didn't want to be included with it. We did everything that we could possibly think of to get you involved, and you didn't do it. We mourned to you and you didn't lament. The idea here is, you've got two. I said the idea of a funeral and the idea of a wedding. These are the two circumstances that Jesus is bringing up here. We played flute for you. We tried to engage in a happy, merry type of thing, and you weren't involved. You didn't want to be involved in that. You wanted to do your own thing. We mourned to you and you didn't lament. The idea of a funeral. The idea that kids will play anything, won't they? I don't care what it is. They'll play. They'll figure something out. How many times have you heard of kids, they play church and they baptize one another? Oh, yeah, man, kids do that kind of thing. That idea is that whatever activity one was trying to get the other involved in, the other one didn't want to do it. They would go back and forth. And the fickle nature of kids, they didn't want to do what they didn't want to do. They're dissatisfied with one another. They don't like the games that they're playing, so they're going to do something completely different. One wanting to play this and the other one wanting to play this. And the other ones are trying to, one will get angry and he'll go and she'll sit down. The other ones go, oh, come on, man, come on, get back. Let's play again. And guess what? It won't be. They're obstinate and they're bullheaded and they won't get involved in it. So here's Jesus, and he's comparing this generation to children who are acting this way. What do you see in this? What is the application that we see in this? What's our application? How do we see ourselves? Okay. Let's go a little bit further, because this will bring it into a little bit. Maybe this will bring it into a little bit better light, and we'll understand it a little bit better. Okay. So here he's comparing them to these children who are very fickle, don't know what they really want, but they know they don't want to do that. So they go back and forth, and some wanted to do this, calling out to one another. Hey, we tried to get you to do this, and you didn't want to do it. So let's think about this. It's the mindset of a generation of people who are ill at ease with who they are. All right. Look in verse 18. It says, "For John, now what had he just done to John? Exalted him. He praised him to the ends of the earth. John was the greatest of the prophets. He was foretelling the coming of the Messiah." Okay. So John, this prophet that was sent to you by God, the ending of the prophet. John was the last of the great prophets. Okay. And he was prophesying the coming of the Messiah. So John came to you, neither eating or drinking, and what did they say about him? Okay, now John came and lived the life of a prophet. He was ascetic, which means he didn't go much for, he wasn't walking around in fancy clothes and soft, comfortable clothing. What does it say he came or walked dressed in? Camel skin. I'm sorry, but I felt camels not exactly the most comfortable thing in the world. Okay, so he did not have nice, fine clothing and walking around dressed very extravagantly. He lived like a prophet did. What did he eat? Locusts and wild honey. That may not have been the only thing that he ate, but that certainly was a major portion of his diet. So this was a man who lived a very ascetic life, the life of a prophet. Not much there. He didn't have a lot. He lived very simply, very he stripped away all of the stuff that he didn't need in his life. So he came. He didn't overindulge. He didn't drink wine. And what do they say about him? He has a demon. All right. You think, okay. All right, this is a man who doesn't engage in all of these things, and they say he has a demon. Then, he turns it on its head. He says, the Son of Man, speaking of whom? Jesus himself. He referred to himself as the Son of Man. The Son of Man came eating and drinking like a normal human being, not engaging in gluttony and drunkenness, but it wasn't like John the Baptist was. I mean, John ate very little and drank very little. He was trying to live a very simple, very sparse life. But here comes the Son of Man, and he eats, he drinks like a normal human being. What do they say about him? Look. They said, look, a sinner. What do they call him? A glutton and a wine bibber. All right, so a drunk and a glutton. All right, so let's think about this. He says, you're like children. You're just like children. You are fickle. You are bullheaded. You don't know what you stand for. You make this big deal about this prophet. In theory, in the way you say about him, oh, he was a great man. But then when he comes to you, lives the life of a prophet, you call him something that he's not. It says he has a demon. He was sent by God, but he has a demon. Well, we know that can't be true. Okay, so you're not you're not to be pleased. There's nothing that's going to please you. This man comes to you and lives the life of a prophet. You say he has a demon. I come to you. I act like a normal human being. I don't overindulge. I'm not drunken. But what do you call me? A glutton and a winebibber. And a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is justified by her children. So, this idea, what is he trying to get across to them? What's the lesson that he's trying to teach these people concerning not just John and Jesus, but himself and themselves? They're what? Okay. They lack understanding. They lack discernment. What else? They cannot be pleased. They're not to be pleased. It's like a child in the play yard. You're not going to play the game I want to play. I just won't participate. This person's going to be in charge. I just won't do that. Or I'm going to do something completely different, and I don't want to fit in with everybody else. I don't want to do what everybody else is doing. Because you're the same way when it comes to the people that God has sent to you. I send you this, and you accuse him of being a demon-possessed. I come to you acting like a normal human being. You call me a glutton and a drunk. You're not to be pleased. You can't be pleased. It's just the way your mindset is not where it needs to be. That's the idea behind this parable. Do you see that in this? Have I confused you completely? Is everybody awake? Okay. I want to make sure. What's that? Okay. Pretty much everybody is still around. All right. So do we have that in our notebooks? Have we written down our lessons, our applications? I believe it is number 10. Number 12. Number 12. We can go back over these as we get a little bit further into it, make sure that we have everything. And you can combine some of these, like two of them were easily combined into one page. All right. So the idea of translating hearing into doing, they heard John, but then they weren't satisfied with his message. Okay? So translating the hearing into doing, I think that's a good idea, right? Okay. All right. Let's move on. Any questions about this? Any questions about this this parable? It's one of those that I think a lot of people wouldn't even consider it a parable. Parables has to be a story. No, it's an analogy. He threw something alongside. He threw the children alongside the children of Israel, and it stuck. It's exactly what he meant for it to say. Because they were acting just like small, unsatisfied, disgruntled children. And there's the most aggravating thing in the world for an adult to be saddled with children that will not behave. I know everybody here can relate to that. It's different if you have children that act like children, but when you have adults that act like children, that's one of the most frustrating and aggravating things that you can imagine. Very few things can aggravate you as much as that. Adults that won't act like adults. Yeah. 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 He's not speaking of everybody here. He's speaking of those. He's speaking of those that he's speaking of. There were those who weren't happy with John. They're not happy with him. And listen, there are people in the world that will never be satisfied. They will never be filled. They will never be. Nothing will ever live up to what they feel they are entitled to. That's the thing. They feel they're entitled to a particular thing. They were looking, for example, with John, they were looking for something a little bit more. And from Jesus, they were looking for more, right? I mean, there were those who wanted Jesus, that Jesus in the temple, driving out the money changers in the temple. That's what they wanted all the time from Jesus. They wanted that fire and brimstone, get everybody riled up and get rid of the Romans and restore us. And that says, you're not satisfied with me. You weren't satisfied with him, you're not satisfied with me. He had a demon and I'm a drunk. Nothing's going to please you people. Yeah. Yeah, they'd already fallen prey to several false messiahs, had risen up and called themselves great. A great number of them had gone off and followed them, and many of them had died, and they were scattered, and that person died, and they went back home, and next thing you know, another person rises up and calls themselves something great. So a great many people went after them and followed them, and then he died, and they were scattered. So, they were not, and part of that is due to a lack of understanding of the Scriptures, and part of it is due to a lack of study of the Scriptures. Because remember, God had told them when he was going to send the Messiah. It wasn't a surprise. He had said, this is going to happen, and he even told them where and when and all of these things. And the problem that they had was none of them were paying attention. Okay? You notice that they called those men who went to find the baby Jesus, they called them wise men. Why were they wise? Because they had studied. They knew where he was. They knew where he was. They knew where Bethlehem was. They knew he was going to be in Bethlehem. They knew that the time was right for the Messiah. So he had always told them that. The problem is nobody was paying attention to it. The study wasn't there. Okay? So, all right. Let's go to the next one. The wise and foolish builders. This is the one, even have a kid's song. I won't make us sing it today. You want to sing it? I said there's a song about this, and I'm not going to make you sing it today. Did you? Are you ready? You want to sing it? Okay. All right. Once again, getting into the idea of hearing. Okay, hearing translating into doing. Important, right? Not enough just to hear. That's a lot of folks. Boy, they believe in it. All you have to do is hear the word and believe it. Right? Believe. There's no doing necessary. Well, we know that's not accurate. All right. So let's read just a little bit of this. Therefore, he always starts out. Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine, what are the sayings that he's talking about? What sayings is Jesus speaking of here? It's what everything he says. It's leading up to what? The kingdom. That's his purpose. He is here to establish a kingdom. Now, their misunderstanding was what kind of kingdom it was, and that was a big misunderstanding. They're thinking of a physical kingdom, a kingship in the sense that they used to have. But all of his sayings had to do with the coming of what? The church, the kingdom of heaven, the church. So everything that he has, everything that he's saying is leading up to that point. Everything he talked about the law, everything he talked about his relationship with his brethren, everything he talked about in his relationship with God himself was all leading up to the coming of the kingdom, the thing that he was here to do, his death on the cross and his establishment of the church. So therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine in regards to the kingdom, all of these teachings that I'm giving you, and does them, I will liken him. That's where we get the idea of the parable. I will liken him to who? A wise man who did what? Built his house. He built a house and he built it on a what? A rock. So what happens? Okay, so we got this wise man. Why is he wise? Okay, we got to understand. He wasn't simply wise because he built a house. He was wise because he built the house. He built it on the rock. Now, okay, there we go. That idea here is the concept of building on the rock. Why is this such a good idea? Why is it a good idea to build a house on a rock? Think about where they live. Think about where a lot of these folks live. They live in an area where the ground is not the most dependable. Okay, a lot of sand, a lot of loamy soil. It's very difficult to find a good, firm foundation. So what you would do, and a lot of times they say, well, they would dig down until they found rock. Well, not always. What they would do is they would dig down and they would dig down and they would dig down until that sand was no longer loose. And then what they would do is they would fill that hole up, and they would fill it up with rock. Okay, so they would build up those foundations, the piers on which that house stood. They would find a way to build that house on the rock, and they would have that rock foundation. All right, is a rock foundation better than a sand foundation? Okay, well, we know that. Why? Because it says, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. Now, we take this, take it for face value. The physical is the idea of physically building our house on a rock. Even today, you have to have a foundation, right? If you're going to build a house and it's going to be within code, they're going to come in and say, what are you putting underneath it? Well, I figured I'd just put it on top of this ground here. And they're going to say, no, you're not. And if you do, we're going to come and we're going to make you tear it down, and you're going to have to do it right again. You're not going to get very far. Okay? You want us to sign off on it so that you can get this house finished, you're going to have to do it the way we tell you to do it. Yes, sir? Absolutely. And they don't just come after you. They do that before you even before you lay the first block. They come, they test the soil. Is it good? Okay, here's a good spot. Now, you have to pour or build or however you do it, but depending on the method that you're going to use, they want to make sure that that first one is set, and it's set right before you do anything else. Now, he does this. We think of the idea of the physical aspect of it. Think about it. It's so clear, the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. We look at this, and what is it saying to us? When we build our house, when we build this house, it's built on what? The rock. Who's the rock? Who is the chief cornerstone? Jesus Christ. So we look at that and we think, well, of course it is. But you remember, the people who are listening to this, they're hearing this, and he doesn't say, I'm the rock. He says, you build it on the rock. Okay. So later on, when they hear these things being told, they hear the apostles' teaching, now they realize, now we understand the rock, the chief cornerstone, which the builders discarded. It was a stumbling block to them. It is the foundation on which the church is built. Okay? So this idea, who's the wise man? Whoever hears these things of mine and does them. Okay? He hears the things and he does them. So when we build our house, our proverbial spiritual house, what do we build it on? Okay. When Jesus Christ, when the church was built, what was it built on? The rock. Exactly. All right. So we know that it was a good idea. We know that building it on the rock was a good idea. Why? Very next verse. Verse 28. Or, I'm sorry, 25. I have a hard time reading. And the rain descended, as it always does. The floods came, as they always do. And the winds blew and beat on that house. But what happened? Or I should say, what didn't happen? It didn't fall. It didn't fall. Why didn't it fall? It was built the right way. From the ground up, it was built in the right way. We got to make sure that we also understand that just starting it on the rock is not the only thing here, is it? It's not just being built on the rock. The rest of the house has to be built correctly as well, doesn't it? We don't just say, well, I got a great foundation, so I'm going to build the rest of it with balsa wood. What's going to happen? Yeah, that's what they make. That's what they make those little airplanes out of, lightweight airplanes out of, is balsa wood. Yeah, that's not a good idea. The rest of the house has to be built well, but no matter how well we overbuilt the rest of it, if that foundation isn't right, it doesn't matter. We could build the most beautiful house in the world with all the most expensive ornamentation. We could put the very best materials in. We could do the nicest carpeting, everything like that. But if at the bottom of that foundation is simply dirt and mud, that house is going to start to crack. And eventually that crack is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger until it falls completely over. So it not only has to be built right, it has to be started right. It not only has to be started right, it has to be finished right. So all of that has to do, he built an entire house. He didn't just put one rock down. All right, so he built a house, but he started it off correctly. If we start it off correctly, we're going to finish it prayerfully. We're going to finish it correctly. Now, but, three-letter word. Everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them, I'm foretelling the coming of the kingdom. When the kingdom comes, I'm telling you into that sandcastle? Yeah. Tide comes in, it washes it out, and it washes, you notice that it washes it out. It starts at the bottom, it just breaks it down to the bottom. All of a sudden, that thing just goes and just sort of slumps on over. And you look over about 30 minutes later, and guess what's left? Just a shapeless mass of sand. Wet sand. Nothing else that it could be. Because it doesn't have really any kind of foundation to it. That's all it is just sand that's scooped up together and made a little bit wet, hold its shape, and there's the extent of it right there. But it says, and the rain descended. Same thing, it's interesting. The same thing happened just because this man built his house on a rock doesn't mean that the rains didn't descend, right? Same thing happened to both of them. The problem is this. The wise man built his house on the rock, so his house stayed firm. Well, he said, the wise man's house stood firm. But that foolish man, he built his house on the sand. The rains came down, floods came up, and the wise man's house went flat because there was nothing holding it up. He didn't put his foundation where it needed to be. If he'd started off the same thing with his friend, the wise man, his house would be standing as well. Both things happened to both men. Both men built maybe even the same type of house. The problem was the foundations were different, and that's where the colossal failure truly occurred. All right. The rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. All right. So the idea of translating hearing into doing, and that's what it has in our outline, the idea of translating hearing into doing. Jesus speaks these words, and he tells them, if you hear these things and do them, you're like a man who's a wise person. If you listen to me, you hear these words, everybody's hearing them. If you hear them and you do them, you're a wise person. If you hear them and you don't do them, you're just as foolish as the person who tries to build a house on a sand foundation. Okay? Now, think about this. As we've said before, the idea of those who, there were those who still wanted to maintain a Jewish identity. And I cannot help but believe he's speaking here to his Jewish brethren. I cannot help but understand here that he's speaking as much to people who still want to continue on in their Jewish faith after the church has come. They're still putting all of their faith in Moses and the law of Moses instead of putting faith in Jesus Christ as the author of this new and greater covenant with God. So you got two different ways to look at it. Today we don't have that. That's not really our issue. Our issue for many people would be, say, denominationalism. I'm putting my faith in Martin Luther. I'm putting my faith in Joseph Smith. I'm putting my faith in whoever, whatever earthly leader there is. That's where I've put my faith instead of putting my faith in the one that truly is the foundation on which I can build. We're not really looking to go back to a Jewish faith. We're, though, trying to build something. What are we building it out of, and what are we building it on top of? All right. So the lesson's still clear to us today. The lesson still is good for us today. We hear the words of Jesus Christ. When we start trying to build our house, what do we build it on? We better build it on the man who spoke the words that tell us how to build the house. Who are you going to listen to? I read a story not too long ago. It was talking about one of the really big architects. He was an architect / engineer, so he knew not only how to design buildings but how to build them correctly. And he had this design for this absolutely stunning home. And if I can find it, I'll bring it in next week and show you. But he had this design for this incredible home. It was just beautiful, well designed, well built. Everything about it was just fantastic. And all he was paid to do was to deliver the plans, and he delivered the plans, and he gave them to the folks that were going to build the builder of the house. Well, the problem was the builder started looking at the plans and started making changes, and he changed a little bit here and a little bit here. It had these fantastic cantilevered roofs, and it had all of these arches and things like this that were just made of, and they were well designed, they were well engineered. The problem was the person that was building them didn't build them according to the plan. They started making changes to them, a little bit here and a little bit there, trying to cut down costs and so forth and so on. Guess what happened to that house? It didn't function as intended at all. These arches that were supposed to maintain this shape started to crack at various points. The cantilevered roofs would not stay perfectly level the way they were supposed to. They started moving here and there. Because they changed it just a little bit at a time. Nothing that we would even realize that they had done. It wasn't until after the fact they couldn't figure out, so they went back to this architect and they said, we can't figure out what's going on. He showed up, they said he was there for about 30 minutes. He realized, he said, they changed my plans. He was just able to look at it and say, they changed my plans. What do you mean? This thing is supposed to be about 5 inches longer. This one is, and he started naming all of the ways in which it was wrong. He said, that's why it's not working as it's supposed to. It wasn't built the way it was supposed to be built. Kind of a lesson to us today. That's why the denominations don't work the way they're supposed to work. They're built on something other than Christ. They can't work. Okay? So anyway, any questions? We're going to stop there. This is going to be our stopping point for the afternoon. Anything else? Anything anybody want to add to what we've got? Yes. Yeah. No. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 No, you're right. You know, back then, in those days, the way things were built were time-honored traditions. You know, you built it this way because this is the way it's always been built, and it's worked when it's done correctly. And what was happening is this guy, you know, you think the people that were, the wise man that was building that house, he was doing something that was time-honored tradition. You know, and you think about the foolish man, you think people were probably trying to convince this foolish man not to do what he was doing? But guess what? It was his decision to do. There was no overarching government that was going to come in and say, hey, you got to tear this down and build it over again. It's like, it's on you. If you build it incorrectly and it falls, you're the one that's going to have to take the hit. And when it did, it says, great was the fall thereof. You know, when you think about, well, if somebody was in that house, or somebody was close to that house, or all of his goods that were in that house may be destroyed simply because he wouldn't do it correctly the first time. You know? Yeah, if somebody was in the house. How many people have left denominationalism because they built their house the wrong way the first time and they realized that they built it wrong and now they want to build it correctly? I'm getting out of this because this is not giving me what I'm supposed to be getting. This is not what I'm supposed to be doing. So they've had to tear down an old house and build a new one on the right foundation. But guess what? Boy, I'd rather do it now than face eternity not having that, you know, doing the right thing the right time. Okay. All right. Thank you. No, and even if it did, even if it took an extra day or 2 days or a week or a month, the idea of having to build something twice is not appealing when you can do it right the first time. Yep. And a lot of times that's what a lot of people end up doing. Their spiritual house has had to be built several times because they keep putting it on the wrong foundation. Put it where it's supposed to go the first time. You don't have to do it again, you know. So, you know, you're right. And listen, it's a frustrating thing. You know, I'm not getting into the idea of bureaucracy being a good or a bad thing, but when someone comes out and says this is not going to work, you have to tear this out and you'd have to do it again, you start realizing very quickly that, you know what, it is better to just go ahead and do it right no matter how foolish you might think that might be, no matter how much in disagreement you are with the principle of it, at the end of the day, doing it right or doing it correctly the first time is a far greater thing than having to pull something apart and doing it over and over and over again. Most times. And all the loss of time and money and energy and all of the stuff that goes along with it. And we're going to get into that here in just a little bit of the idea of the king and building a tower and the concept of building something there, having to redo it or do it again or something like that. So we're going to get into that next time. All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time and appreciate your input. Looking forward to next week. I believe next week is, next week's third Sunday. I forgot. Next week is third Sunday. Week after that we got singing. So, all right. We're going to have a song of invitation. We have a song of invitation that's been announced. We're going to sing that, and anyone who needs to avail themselves of the prayers of this church, now's an opportunity to do so. So come while we stand and while we sing.
Great day coming, a great day coming, there's a great day coming.